December in Chicago was harsh, the kind of cold that went through expensive wool coats and found every opening, every weak spot. At 38, James Whitmore had learned to protect himself against discomfort, both the body kind and the feelings kind. That came with being a widower, raising a daughter alone. "Daddy, can we get hot chocolate?" His 6-year-old daughter, Claire, pulled at his hand as they walked down Michigan Avenue. Her curly blonde hair stuck out from under her cream-colored hat, her cheeks pink from the cold. James looked at his watch. He had a phone meeting in 45 minutes, needed to look at the quarterly reports, and his assistant had sent 3 urgent emails in the last 10 minutes. But looking down at Claire's hopeful face, he found himself nodding. "Quick stop. Then we need to get you home before the snow gets worse." As CEO of Whitmore Financial, James controlled boardrooms and handled portfolios worth billions. But his real job, the one that mattered, was the small hand currently holding his as they walked through the crowded sidewalk. His wife, Sarah, had died 3 years ago. Sudden, senseless, a drunk driver running a red light. And since then, James had rebuilt his entire world around one main truth. Claire was all that mattered. The Starbucks on the corner was warm and crowded with holiday shoppers looking for shelter from the cold. James ordered Claire's hot chocolate with extra whipped cream and a black coffee for himself, trying not to think about the emails piling up on his phone. "Can I have a cookie, too?" Claire asked, her eyes on the display case. Before James could answer, Claire suddenly pulled away from him and pressed her face against the window, her breath fogging the glass. "Daddy, look." James followed her gaze. Across the street, sitting on a bench at the bus stop, sat a young woman. She couldn't have been more than 25, with blonde hair falling limply around her face. But what stopped James's heart was the bundle. In her arms, a tiny infant, maybe 3 or 4 months old, wrapped in what looked like a thin blanket and a worn sweater. The woman was trying to protect the baby from the wind, bent over protectively, but even from across the street, James could see her shivering. The baby, thankfully, appeared to be sleeping, but the mother's lips were colored blue. "Daddy," Claire said, her voice small and urgent. "Her baby is freezing." James felt the familiar walls go up. He'd worked hard to teach Claire compassion. But Chicago was full of people in need. You couldn't help everyone. You had to protect yourself, protect her from the crushing weight of all that suffering. He gave money to charities. He supported shelters. But getting personally involved was different, complicated, possibly dangerous. "I know, sweetheart. It's very sad. But we have to help them." Claire wasn't asking. She was stating a fact, the way she might point out that the sky was blue or that snow was cold. Her small hand found his again, squeezing tight. Mummy would have helped them. The words hit James like a physical blow. Sarah would have helped. Sarah had always helped, stopping to talk to homeless veterans, keeping granola bars in her purse to hand out, volunteering at shelters. Despite James's concerns about safety, she'd been fearless in her compassion. And Claire had inherited that same bone-deep certainty that people mattered more than comfort. James looked at his daughter, then back at the woman across the street. The snow was falling harder now. The temperature was dropping. "That baby." "Stay right here," James said, guiding Claire to a chair. "Don't move." He crossed the street quickly, his mind already running through logistics, risk assessments, practical considerations. But when he reached the bench and the young woman looked up at him with hollow, exhausted eyes, all of that fell away. "Hi," James said gently. "I'm James. My daughter and we saw you from across the street. It's getting really cold. Do you have somewhere to go?" The woman's arms tightened around the baby. "We're fine. I don't mean to bother you, but that baby." James stopped, changed his approach. "I have a daughter about 6 years old. I remember when she was that small. Babies can't control their temperature. This cold is dangerous." The woman's face crumpled slightly, and James saw her for what she really was. A terrified young mother trying desperately to appear in control while her world fell apart around her. "I know," she whispered. "I know. I don't know what to do. The shelter is full. Everywhere is full. They said maybe tomorrow, maybe the day after. But Grace," her voice broke. "Grace is so cold. I'm going to help you," James heard himself say. "Both of you. I have a car. I can drive you somewhere warm, a hotel, another shelter, wherever you need to go. I don't have money for a hotel. I didn't ask if you did." James pulled out his phone. "Please let me help. My daughter was watching from that Starbucks across the street, and she'll never forgive me if I don't do something." The woman, her name was Emily, she finally told him, hesitated for another long moment. Then she nodded, tears freezing on her cheeks. James crossed back to the Starbucks, where Claire was pressed against the window, watching anxiously. "Is the baby okay?" she asked immediately. "The baby's name is Grace, and she's cold and scared, just like her mama. We're going to help them. But first," James bent down to Claire's eye level. "I need you to be very grown up right now. These people need our help, but they're also strangers, and that means we need to be smart and safe. Can you do that?" Claire nodded seriously. "Like when Mummy helped people. Exactly like that." James's driver brought the car around. Emily held Grace tightly as they helped her into the warm vehicle, Claire scooting over to make room, already chattering about her stuffed animals at home and how maybe baby Grace would like to see them in the car. James made calls. His first thought was a hotel, but Emily needed more than a room for a night. She needed resources, support, a pathway forward. He called shelters as assistant. Finally, one of the board members of a non-profit he supported, James. "It's 5 o'clock on a Friday," his friend Tom said. "Everything's closed. Then we open something. Tom, there's an infant involved, 4 months old. I have resources. Tell me how to use them." By the time they pulled up to James's brownstone in Lincoln Park, he had a plan. Tom had a friend who ran a transitional housing program specifically for young mothers. They had an opening, but not until Monday. James would cover Emily and Grace for the weekend, then help make the transition happen. "This is where you live?" Emily asked as they pulled into the circular driveway, staring at the elegant 3-story home. "It's too big for just the two of us," James admitted. "But it was Sarah's, my late wife's dream house. Claire and I keep it for her." Inside, James's housekeeper, Mrs. Patterson, took in the situation with barely a raised eyebrow. At 65, she'd been with the family since Claire was born, and nothing surprised her anymore. "The guest suite on the second floor," she said immediately. "I'll get it ready. And that baby needs a proper meal. Is she breastfeeding?" Emily nodded, exhausted and overwhelmed. "Then you need food and water and rest. Come with me, dear. Let's get you both warm." Over the next hour, James watched. His orderly life rearranged itself around these two strangers. Mrs. Patterson prepared a meal while Emily fed Grace in the quiet of the guest room. Claire insisted on gathering blankets and stuffed animals, creating what she called a cozy nest. For the baby, James made more calls. His lawyer about legal protections and liability. His security team about safety protocols. His assistant rescheduling everything on Monday's calendar. Each conversation brought the same reaction: surprise, concern, warnings about getting involved. But every time doubt crept in, James would see Claire's face pressed against that coffee shop window, hear her voice. "Daddy, her baby is freezing." When Emily finally came out, showered and wearing clean clothes Mrs. Patterson had found, she looked younger and even more fragile. Grace was asleep in her arms, finally warm and fed. "Thank you," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't have words for what you've done. If this story is touching your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment about a time someone helped you when you needed it most. James pointed for her to sit. Claire was in the next room playing quietly with her dolls, giving the adults space, but staying close enough to peek in occasionally. You don't need to thank me, but I do need to understand your situation, not to judge. To help, can you tell me what happened? The story came out in pieces. Emily had been 22 when she met Marcus. He'd been charming, attentive, everything a young woman dreams of. By the time she realized the charm was control and the attention was surveillance, she was pregnant. The abuse got worse. She'd finally left when Grace was 2 months old, running away with nothing but the clothes on her back and her baby. I stayed with a friend for a while, Emily said, staring at her hands. But her boyfriend didn't like me being there. I've been looking for work, but everyone wants references, previous employment, and I was a waitress before Marcus made me quit. I don't have anything, no family, no money, nowhere to go. What about Grace's father? Does he know where you are? Fear flashed across Emily's face. I hope not. I got a restraining order, but okay. James's voice was calm, but his mind was racing. This was more complicated than he'd expected, more dangerous. Here's what's going to happen tonight. You and Grace sleep. Tomorrow, we'll go through everything step by step. I have lawyers who can help with the custody situation. Make sure the restraining order is solid. I have connections at companies that need good employees. We'll find you work, and Monday you'll move into a transitional housing program that will give you stability while you get back on your feet. Emily was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. James thought about Sarah, about the last conversation they'd had before she died, when she'd been planning a volunteer shift at a women's shelter. And James had been annoyed because it meant he'd have to leave work early to pick up Claire. You're always helping everyone else, he'd said, frustrated. When do you help yourself? Sarah had smiled, that gentle smile that had first made him fall in love with her. That's the thing, James. Helping others is how I help myself. It's how I remember I'm human, not just a job title or a to-do list. It's how I teach Claire what really matters. He'd rolled his eyes, then kissed her goodbye, told her to be safe. 6 hours later, she was gone. My wife believed that we're responsible for each other, James said finally. That having the ability to help means you have the obligation to help. I didn't always understand that, but I'm learning that we can change something in James's carefully built world. Emily proved to be smart, resourceful, and desperately grateful for a chance to rebuild. She helped Mrs. Patterson with cooking, played with Claire, slowly began to believe that maybe she could have a future after all. Grace thrived in the warm house, her cheeks growing pink, her tiny sounds of contentment filling rooms that had been too quiet for too long, and Claire, watching all of it with her mother's compassionate eyes, seemed to glow with the joy of helping someone. Sunday evening, James sat in his study, looking over the plans for Monday. The transitional housing program was solid. 6 months of support, job training, childcare assistance. His lawyer had filed additional protective orders and was working on a longer-term custody strategy. One of his company's partners had agreed to interview Emily for a receptionist position. It was all coming together. Emily would be okay. Grace would be safe. And then his phone rang. Mr. Whitmore, this is Detective Sarah Johnson with the Chicago PD. We have a situation. James's blood ran cold. What kind of situation? A Marcus Holloway has been picked up trying to gain access to your property. Says he's looking for his girlfriend and baby. Very upset, possibly under the influence. We have him in custody. But I need to ask, is there a young woman, an infant, currently at your residence? James closed his eyes. Of course, it wouldn't be simple. Yes, Emily Marsh and her daughter, Grace. They're here under my protection. Mr. Whitmore, I need to be clear about something. This man is unpredictable and dangerous. You've potentially put yourself and your family at risk. I'm aware. What do I need to do to keep everyone safe? The next several hours were tense, police stationed outside the house. Emily terrified, holding Grace and apologizing over and over. Claire, confused and scared by the sudden presence of police officers. James sat with Emily in the guest room while Mrs. Patterson kept Claire busy downstairs. This is my fault, Emily kept saying. I've brought danger to your home, to your daughter. I should leave. You're not leaving. James's voice was firm. Marcus was picked up trying to trespass. That's a violation of the restraining order. He's going back to jail, and tomorrow we're going to make sure he stays away from you permanently. You don't understand. He's relentless. He won't stop. He'll find me wherever I go. Then we'll make sure there's always someone standing between him and you. Emily, I meant what I said. I'm going to help you. That doesn't end because it's harder than I expected. Emily looked at him with wonder. Why? Why do you even care? James thought about Claire's voice. Daddy, her baby is freezing. He thought about Sarah and how she would have moved heaven and earth for someone in need. He thought about the man he'd been before Sarah died. Successful, wealthy, and somehow smaller than he should have been. Because my daughter reminded me that being human means helping each other. Because my wife would have done the same thing. And because, he paused, because I think maybe I needed to be reminded that there are things more important than quarterly reports and board meetings. Monday morning, Detective Johnson called with an update. Marcus was being held on multiple charges, including violation of the restraining order and drug possession. He'd likely been in custody for a while. James took Emily to the transitional housing facility. It was clean, safe, staffed by people who understood trauma and survival. The director, a woman named Carmen, who James had met several times through his non-profit work, welcomed Emily with genuine warmth. You'll be safe here, Carmen promised, and when you're ready, we'll help you build whatever life you want. James left Emily with a check to cover initial expenses, his lawyers, contact information, and a promise to check in regularly. Claire had insisted on giving baby Grace one of her favorite stuffed animals, a soft elephant she'd named Peanut. So Grace has a friend, Claire explained seriously. In the car driving home, Claire was quiet for a long time. Finally, she spoke. Daddy, are Emily and Grace going to be okay? I think so, sweetheart. They have help now, people who will make sure they're safe and can build a good life. Good, Claire nodded, satisfied. Then Mummy would have liked them? Yes, James said, his throat tight. She would have. Over the following months, James watched Emily transform. The job worked out. She was bright and organized, quickly becoming invaluable to the partner who'd hired her. She found daycare for Grace through a program Carmen connected her with. She took online classes in the evenings, working toward a business degree. More importantly, she began to heal. The fear didn't disappear overnight, but it faded. Her smile came more easily. Grace grew into a happy, healthy baby who laughed at peekaboo and loved music. James stayed involved, but at a distance. He paid for some of Emily's classes. He made sure the restraining order remained solid. He occasionally had Emily and Grace over for dinner, where Mrs. Patterson would fuss over the baby and Claire would provide entertainment, but mostly he gave Emily what she needed most, the space to discover she could stand on her own. A year after that snowy December day, Emily invited James and Claire to her apartment. It was small but clean and cheerful, decorated with second-hand furniture that Emily had made cozy. Grace, now almost 2, toddled around, showing Claire her toys. I wanted you to see this, Emily said, gesturing around the space. My place. My home. Mine. It's beautiful, James said honestly. I got my associate's degree last week. I'm starting a new job next month. Office manager at a small marketing firm. Better pay, room to grow. Emily smiled, and there was pride. In it, hard-won and genuine. I'm okay now. Really okay. And it started because a 6-year-old girl looked out a window and saw someone who needed help. James thought about that day, how close he'd come to walking away, how the easier choice, the safer choice, would have been to finish getting his coffee and go home to his comfortable life. Claire has Sarah's heart, James said. She sees people, really sees them. You both do, Emily replied. You could have just given me money and walked away. Instead, you gave me a chance to remember who I was before everything fell apart. That's worth more than any check. As they left that evening, Claire holding Grace's chubby hand and making her laugh, James felt something shift in his chest. For 3 years, he'd been surviving, going through the motions of living while feeling completely disconnected from the world around him. But that moment outside Starbucks, when Claire had pointed at a freezing baby and said, "We have to help them," that had been the beginning of coming back to life. Not by forgetting Sarah or moving on from grief, but by remembering what she'd tried to teach him, that we're all connected, that suffering matters, that having resources means having responsibility. "Daddy," Claire asked as they walked to the car, "are you happy?" The question caught James off guard. "What makes you ask that? You smile more now, like you used to with Mummy?" James stopped, bent down to his daughter's level. "You know what? I think I am happy because you taught me something important." "What?" "That sometimes the best thing you can do is see someone who needs help and decide to care. Even when it's hard, even when it's complicated, because that's what makes us human." Claire considered this seriously, and it's what Mummy would have done. "Yes," James said, pulling her into a hug. "It's exactly what Mummy would have done." They drove home through Chicago streets that no longer felt quite as cold or as indifferent. Somewhere in the city, Emily was putting Grace to bed, reading her a story, building a future one day at a time. Somewhere, people were suffering, struggling, needing help. And James Whitmore, CEO and single father, was learning that the most important thing he could teach his daughter wasn't about success or wealth or professional achievement. It was about seeing someone in need and choosing not to look away, about remembering that every person you pass on the street is someone's daughter, someone's mother, someone who matters, about understanding that a warm coat given away is worth more than 1,000 expensive coats kept in the closet. That night, tucking Claire into bed, James noticed she'd replaced the elephant she'd given to Grace with a different stuffed animal. "Don't you, Miss Peanut?" he asked. Claire shook her head. "Grace needs her more. And anyway, Daddy, you can't keep things that other people need. Mummy taught me that." James kissed his daughter's forehead, turned off the light, and stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her drift off to sleep. Sarah would have been proud of the little girl they'd raised, proud of the compassion Claire carried so naturally, proud that even in her absence, her values lived on. And maybe, just maybe, Sarah would have been proud of James, too, for finally understanding what she'd always known, that the measure of a life isn't what you gather, but what you give away. Not what you achieve, but who you help along the way. One freezing day, one child's clear moral compass, one decision to care. When it would have been easier not to, that's all it took to change 3 lives.